It's time for our head-to-head. James Cleverly's been reading the riot act to pro-Palestine protesters, warning the demonstrators that they've made their point, he says, and now they need to stop. Well, it comes after it was revealed that a whopping £25 million has been spent on policing the demonstration since October. So speaking today, James Cleverly said, the question I ask myself is, what are these protests genuinely hoping to achieve? They've made a point, and they made it very, very loudly, and they're not really saying anything new. Well, indeed, large pro-Palestine mobs demanding a ceasefire have brought cities like London to a standstill. But I think this hasn't got enough coverage, by the way. Just yesterday, Hamas rejected a ceasefire proposal. So tonight I am asking, should we see an end to the Gaza protest? Let me know your thoughts by emailing gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me at gbnews, and make sure you go and vote in our poll as well. The results will follow shortly. But first, going head-to-head on this are lawyer Tasnim Akunjee and also columnist and broadcaster Angela Epstein. Both of you, thank you very, very much. Ladies first, Angela, I'll go to you if that's OK. Look, have these protesters made their point now? They're not saying anything new. They need to stop.
Yeah, good evening to both of you. They've not only made their point, they've abused the very freedoms that are afforded in the liberal democracy, which include freedom of speech and the right to peaceful protest. Projecting a genocidal slogan on the side of Big Ben, having sort of completely obvious support for Hamas numbered amongst the protesters. The river to the sea is a genocidal call for the destruction of Israel, and therefore all the Jews living in there. The whole climate of intimidation that has come with these marches. Ben Jamal heard saying, he's from the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, saying before the last march, we want so many of you to come, we'll have to lock the doors of Parliament. This climate of intimidation obviously affects Jewish people particularly. They feel ostracized, they feel intimidated, particularly at a time of spiraling anti-Semitism. But so should any right-minded, decent individual see that this has gone beyond the realms of decent free protest. Can I just make one very quick point as well? There is no legislative impact on any of these things, be it debates in Parliament, be it all of these protests. I have lots of friends in Israel who actually say to me, and people in Gaza have been interviewed to the same effect, this is going to have no impact whatsoever. All it does is decent people are made to feel afeared in their own country.
Angela, I'll come back to you. Tasnim, would you like to come back to that then?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the right to protest is a democratic right. It seems that Angela wants to be the arbiter of when people can actually exercise their democratic rights. And the fact that the idea that a quote-unquote genocidal slogan was put on the side of Parliament, well, that slogan of the river to the sea was something that has been repeated many times by Benjamin Netanyahu himself. So it seems that the slogan is called genocidal only when some people on the pro-Palestinian side say it, but when it's Netanyahu himself, then apparently that slogan is no longer loaded with the type of import that's being said. But in terms of cost, yes, there is a significant cost to these demonstrations happening week in, week out. And that's partly because there is no movement in terms of the UK position on the issue of supporting Israel or otherwise. And that very much goes and flies in the face of the fact that we have the ICJ who's currently hearing a case about whether or not Israel has engaged itself in behavior that is at the foothills of genocide. Now, when we have that going on, then it's only right and proper that people are protesting our involvement in that, especially when our involvement in that may well be against and breaching the UK criminal law.
OK, all right. Well, Angela, I mean, the big thing for me, I suppose, in all of this is how long does this go on for? But also, is it going to have any material impact? And I mean, as far as I can tell, Hamas don't particularly want a ceasefire, for goodness sake.
They don't. Remember, Hamas broke the last ceasefire in 2020, and their charter says they won't settle until they've destroyed Israel and wiped out world Jewry. And can I also point out that Hamas have adopted from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So So if you're telling me that projecting a slogan like that on the side of Big Ben, the very symbol of our democracy, is somehow palatable and the definition of free speech, well, that's for the birds, and you need to do your research properly. But in terms of where it's going to go, Israel ultimately is on its own, as it has been with most of its major conflicts. Like I say, I was in Israel on October the 7th, so all the hand-wringing that goes on this side of the argument here in Britain and elsewhere around the world is just a nonsense. I was there on October the 6th, which was a lovely sunny day, normal, everybody going about their business, and then woken to the sound of rockets and gunfire the next morning. Hamas are a brutal genocidal death cult who have said they will repeat October the 7th again and again. And somehow, if this was a peaceful protest, why don't the protesters on these marches say, give back the hostages, Hamas, lay down your arms, abandon in your charter the declaration to destroy Israel, because then the conflict could be over tomorrow. But it doesn't happen. And meanwhile, Israel has to rely on itself. And that's why these protests are absolutely counterproductive. And all they're doing is making decent people fear for themselves when they go into central London.
All right, now, Tasnim, I'll get you to come back to that, but also, just put it to you as well, this happened an hour ago, apparently. Westminster Police tweeted, I'll just read it out. Officers responded to a small pro-Palestinian protest in Whitehall, where protesters threw paint at a property. All 15 of the protesters have been arrested, etc. Obviously, it remains to be seen that presumably that will result in an active court case, so I don't want to comment on that specifically. But what I do want to say is this is kind of happening every day now. Something like this is happening every day, isn't it? So, does this need to be stopped? Are we endorsing lawlessness, really, here?
So the issue is where there's anyone that's committed any offences, it's right and proper that they should be arrested. And in terms of the pro-Palestinian protests, there have been over 750,000 attending just one. There's been minimal number of arrests there. And there's always going to be some contingent of people who come along to cause trouble. And it's right and proper that police are deployed and they arrest such people. And there have been the convictions for those very small numbers of people who are there to cause trouble. So I think in terms of policing, the police have been quite clear about their position on this. They've been very clear about that particular statement, the river to the sea. They've said it's not in breach of any criminal laws. They've confirmed that. And on top of that, when it comes to the situation where Suella Braverman are turned around to try and push some backdoor legislation in terms of suggesting that the Palestinian flag was a terrorist symbol, when we found that, Suella Braverman went up against the police on this and she lost her job over it quite properly. So I think in terms of where we are with this country, we've got a very clear definition of what freedom of expression is, and the police are doing quite an admirable job in the position they're in terms of making that happen peacefully.
Angela, we are seeing today as well £31 million worth of taxpayer money is going to go to helping protect MPs, things like bodyguards that were also called from the likes of Harriet Harman for MPs to be able to work from home, for example, because of threats. OK, I mean, is it not from these kind of protests maybe that these threats are coming in the round?
Absolutely. Look, I haven't got the data in front of me, but if you take a kind of general overview, you can see the kind of quarters from where the protesters who are intimidating MPs are coming from. Mike Freer, who was the MP for in North London, has said he's having to step down precisely because of his support for Israel, and that shouldn't be happening in a liberal democracy. There is a climate of fear and intimidation and mob rule that is happening, and it's being given succor by these marches, and it should be enough to you actually to say if even one British person in this country, Jewish or otherwise, feels intimidated by people shouting from the river to the sea, that is enough to ban the marches.
All right, now, just in the interest of balance, obviously, Tasnim, although we are going to have to be quite quick, do you think that if a ceasefire was voted on, would these protests stop? Because if it doesn't actually make a blind bit of difference to what's going on in the Middle East, that is a problem, isn't it? I mean, Hamas don't seem to want a ceasefire.
Let me come back. Where there is a climate of fear is from Keir Starmer himself and the Labour Party against people like the Speaker of the House subverting the rules of our democracy to game the system, right? That's where there's a climate of fear. And in order to deflect from that, what we've seen is now MPs talking about so-called fear that happens in the background from protesters. Let me tell you what fear is. Fear is what Margaret Thatcher went through when the Brighton bombing took place. Fear is what John Major went through when his office was attacked at Westminster by mortars. That's fear. And what Martin Amos went through, David Amos went through, and also Joe Cox. That's fear. Well, subverting our democracy causes anger.
I'm sorry.
All right. Look, both of you, thank you. Yet again, another cracking head-to-head that we could have just done a whole show on. But thank you very much, both of you. That was lawyer Tasnim Akunjee and columnist and broadcaster Angela Epstein. Look, who do you agree with? Is James cleverly right that the pro-Palestine demonstrators have made their point and the Gaza protest should end? Theo says they should never have been allowed to start in the first place. Theo, it's a great point, because look, what happens now? How do you just stop this? Now, Susie says, and what message would shutting the protests send? That it's OK to murder thousands of innocent people? Lee says, those are just words from Cleverly. Well, I mean, they are, aren't they? You're absolutely spot on there. He says it's yet more gesture politics. Yeah, arguably completely pointless. But now your verdict is it 92% of you agree that James Cleverly is right and the Gaza protest should end. 8% of you say they should not.